The great hall of the alien empire glowed with cold silver light. High pillars stretched upward, carved with sharp lines and symbols of victories past. Crowds filled the balconies, whispering, laughing, mocking. This was not a day of peace. It was a day of humiliation, carefully staged by those who wished to remind humanity of its place. The human envoy, a tall man with steady eyes, stood at the center. His uniform was simple compared to the dazzling robes of alien lords around him. He did not wear armor or jewels. He carried only the weight of his duty. He knew he was here not to be honored but to be ridiculed. The Empire had agreed to a fragile truce, and this gathering was part of the arrangement. But in truth, everyone knew the Empire wanted to display its power and mock the human race. At the front of the hall, the Emperor's voice rose. His tone was smooth but sharp like a blade. For our guest, the representative of the humans, we bring a gift. May it remind you always of what humanity is worth to us. The doors creaked open. Guards dragged forward a figure in chains. It was a woman, an alien woman. Her long hair hung loose, her once noble garments torn and faded. She stumbled as she was forced to kneel before the human envoy. The crowd roared with cruel laughter. This, the Emperor continued, is one of our disgraced nobles. Once a voice in our courts, now nothing more than a shame. We give her to you, human. Take her as you will. A reminder that both she and your kind belong beneath us. The woman lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were filled with fire, but also with deep exhaustion. She looked not at the Emperor, not at the jeering crowd, but at the human standing before her. For a moment she expected his face to twist with scorn. She expected to be treated as she had been treated for years, like a thing, not a person. The hall was silent, waiting for the human to laugh, to shove her away, to play his part in the insult. Instead, he stepped forward. His boots echoed against the polished floor. He knelt down, lowering himself to her level, and carefully touched the chains at her wrists. You don't deserve this, he said softly, his voice steady enough for those near to hear, but calm enough to seem unshaken. You are not a gift. You are not a mockery. You are a person. Gasps rippled across the hall. The alien lords leaned forward in disbelief. This was not the reaction they had planned. The envoy stood and faced the Emperor. I accept her, he declared, his voice louder now, carrying strength. But not as your insult. I accept her as one under my protection. If you think this makes me weak, then you do not understand what strength is. The Emperor's smile faltered just for an instant before returning. Very well, human, he said smoothly. Take her. Let your people see what burden you carry. His tone was filled with mockery, but in his eyes there was a shadow of unease. The chains were unlocked and the woman stumbled forward. The human caught her before she fell. She stiffened at his touch, uncertain, unused to kindness. He supported her as if she were fragile crystal, though he sensed the strength hidden inside her frame. Without another word, he led her out of the hall. Behind them, the court erupted in laughter again, desperate to drown out the strange silence left by his choice. They traveled together in uneasy silence. The woman walked with her head bowed, though her steps grew steadier with every passing moment. She was not used to freedom and certainly not used to walking beside someone who did not sneer at her. Finally, when they reached the quarters prepared for the envoy, she spoke. Her voice was sharp, but quiet. Why did you do that? He looked at her calmly. Do what? Treat me as if I mattered. I was given to you as a joke. You were supposed to laugh. That is what they wanted. I am not interested in what they wanted, he replied. He poured a glass of water and held it out to her. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling. I don't see you as a joke. I see you as someone they fear. They fear you because you remind them of their cruelty, and I do not laugh at courage. She stared at him, stunned. No one had spoken to her like this in years. That night she could not sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at the alien city below. Lights glittered in the distance, but to her, they felt cold and sharp, like the eyes of those who had mocked her. She remembered her past. Once, she had been part of that very court. She had spoken against corruption, against cruelty, and for that, she had been cast down, stripped of title, beaten, mocked, and finally given away like a broken trinket. Yet, here she was, treated with gentleness by the one person she least expected, a human, a race considered weak, unworthy, primitive. But he had shown her more honor in a single moment than her people had in years. The envoy, too, lay awake, though he did not show it. He knew the dangers of what had happened today. By accepting her, he had turned an insult into a statement. The Empire would not forget. But he also knew something else. If he abandoned her, if he played along with their mockery, he would become exactly what they thought he was. And that he could never allow. Morning came. The woman woke to find food waiting for her. Not scraps, not the cold leftovers she had grown used to, but warm bread, fruit, and water. The human sat across from her, calm and quiet. "You are free now," he told her. "You can choose what happens next." She frowned. "Free? I am not free. They gave me away because they despise me. If I return, they will kill me. If I stay with you, I will bring you shame." He shook his head. "Shame comes only when you do wrong. You have done nothing wrong. Stay if you wish. Leave if you wish. The choice is yours, not theirs." Her throat tightened. For years, every choice had been stolen from her. Now, for the first time, she was offered one. She did not answer at once, but in her heart, something shifted. That day, as they prepared to leave the Empire's capital, whispers followed them. The alien courtiers mocked them openly, jeering as the disgraced woman walked beside the human envoy. But she noticed something strange. Their laughter no longer cut into her as it once had. Perhaps it was because the human walked tall and unashamed, his calm presence shielding her more than chains ever could. For the first time, she felt the faintest spark of hope. By the time they boarded the ship that would take them away, she looked at the human differently, not as a master, not as a rescuer, but as a strange puzzle she did not yet understand. "You are either very foolish," she told him quietly, "or very brave." He smiled faintly. "Maybe both." She looked out the window as the stars stretched into lines and the ship leapt into faster-than-light travel. Behind her, the empire that had mocked her grew distant. Ahead of her, something unknown awaited. For the first time in years, she felt as though her story was not over. The stars rushed by outside the ship, endless lines of light stretching across the dark. The alien woman sat quietly near the viewing window, her hands folded in her lap. She had not spoken much since leaving the Empire's capital. She had expected to feel relief at escaping the cruel laughter of the court, but instead she felt a strange emptiness. She had no title, no home, and no family left. Everything she once was had been stripped away. The human envoy noticed her silence. He did not press her with questions. Instead, he gave her space, speaking only when needed. When food was brought, he shared it evenly. When she needed rest, he made sure she had privacy. These simple acts unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. She understood cruelty. She knew how to survive hatred. But kindness, that was harder to face. One evening, as the ship drifted through quiet space, she finally spoke. "Do you even know who I am?" He looked up from the reports he had been reading. "I know you were once noble," he said calmly. "I know they called you a traitor, but I don't care about what they call you. I care about what I see." Frowned. "And what do you see?" "I see someone who deserves respect," he answered without hesitation. "Someone stronger than the ones who mocked you." His words left her silent. For years she had heard nothing but insults, lies, and twisted laughter. Now, for the first time, Someone had spoken to her as if she mattered. She turned her gaze back to the stars, but her heart felt unsteady. Days passed. The ship reached a human outpost on a small planet at the edge of neutral space. It was no grand city, only a cluster of buildings surrounded by rocky hills. The human envoy led her through the streets. People stared. Some looked curious, others suspicious. A few whispered to each other as they noticed the alien woman walking beside him. "Why do they look at me like that?" she asked softly. "Because they don't understand," he replied. "They see an alien, and they wonder why you are here. They don't know what I know." She felt her chest tighten. She had thought leaving the Empire would end the whispers, but now she found them again, only in different voices. Here, she was not mocked as a fallen noble, but distrusted as a foreigner. She wondered if there would ever be a place where she belonged. Life at the outpost was quiet compared to the Empire's court. The envoy had work, negotiations, reports, and endless meetings with local commanders. The woman, however, had no clear role. At first, she stayed inside the quarters, spending hours by the window, lost in thought. But slowly, she began to walk through the settlement. She saw children running through the dusty streets, their laughter, light and free. She saw workers repairing machines, talking and joking as they worked. These sights reminded her of a life she had once known, simple, unguarded, far from power and cruelty. One day, she passed by a small group of children who were playing. They stopped when they saw her, their eyes wide. A little girl, braver than the others, stepped forward. "Are you from the stars?" the child asked. The woman hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "I am from far away." "Can you tell us about it?" the child asked eagerly. For a moment, the woman almost refused. But then she sat down on a nearby stone and told them a story. She spoke of the great forests of her homeworld, where the trees glowed softly at night, and of the rivers that carried songs as they flowed. The children listened with wide eyes, fascinated. For the first time in many years, the woman felt her voice carry something other than shame. When the envoy returned that evening, he found her surrounded by children, telling them tales of her people. He smiled faintly, though he said nothing. He knew this was the beginning of her healing, but not everyone welcomed her presence. Some humans muttered that she was dangerous. Others whispered that the envoy had been tricked by the Empire into keeping her. In meetings, certain commanders hinted that she should not be allowed near important matters. One night, as the envoy walked her back from the market, a group of soldiers blocked their path. "Why do you keep her here?" one of them demanded. "She doesn't belong, she's one of them." The envoy's eyes hardened. "She belongs because I said she does. She is under my protection." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They wanted to argue, but the firmness in his tone stopped them. At last, they stepped aside. The woman walked on quietly, but her hands trembled. Later, inside the quarters, she whispered, "You should not do that for me. They will turn against you." He shook his head. "If they turn against me for doing what is right, then let them. I will not cast you aside." Her heart ached, with emotions she did not know how to name. No one had ever defended her like this. She had been abandoned by her own people, mocked by the Empire, and yet this human stood firm beside her. As weeks passed, she and the envoy began to share more of their lives. She told him about her childhood, the music of her world, the traditions of her house before it fell. He told her about Earth, its oceans, its mountains, its long histories of struggle and survival. They laughed sometimes, though quietly, at small things they discovered in common. One evening, as they walked along the edge of the outpost, she asked, "Why are you always so calm? Even when they laugh, even when they threaten, you do not change." He paused for a moment before answering, "Because anger gives them power. If I stay calm, they cannot control me." She thought about this deeply. She had spent years consumed by bitterness, her spirit poisoned by betrayal. But now she wondered if perhaps strength was not always in striking back but in standing steady. Still, shadows lingered. Messages arrived from the Empire. Some carried threats, others carried mocking laughter. They reminded her that she was nothing, that she was forgotten, that her only worth had been to serve as an insult. She read them in silence, but each word felt like a knife. The envoy noticed her growing quiet. One night he found her tearing one of the letters into pieces. Her hands shook with rage. "They will never stop," she whispered. "No matter where I go, I will always be their joke." The envoy gently took the torn pieces from her hands and set them aside. "No," he said firmly. "You will be what you choose to be, not what they call you." She stared at him, her eyes wet with tears she had long refused to show. For the first time, she felt a flicker of belief. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps her story was not over. The next morning, she made a choice. Instead of hiding, she began to help at the outpost. She used her knowledge of trade and diplomacy to guide small decisions. She spoke to workers, listened to their struggles, and offered solutions drawn from her years in court. Slowly, people began to see her not as a burden but as someone who could help. Whispers still followed her, but some whispers began to change. A few even carried respect. At night, when she sat by the window, she no longer stared only at the stars. In sorrow, she began to imagine futures, uncertain, fragile, but real. Futures where she was not just a discarded noble, but someone who mattered again. And through it all, the human envoy remained at her side. He did not push her, nor did he try to shape her path. He simply walked with her, offering quiet strength. In his presence, she felt something she had not felt in years: safety. It was still only the beginning. Shadows of danger and whispers of hatred lingered on every side. But in the life they were building, small and fragile as it was, hope had begun to grow. For the first time, she began to believe she could rise again. The air at the human outpost grew heavy with whispers. The alien woman had begun to walk the settlement more openly, and though some people greeted her with respect, others still turned away. She had started helping the local council with advice. Her knowledge of trade, law, and diplomacy proved useful, but that only drew sharper eyes from those who distrusted her. One evening, the envoy returned from a long meeting with human commanders. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a shadow. She noticed it immediately. "What happened?" she asked. He set his papers on the table. "The empire is breaking," he said. "There are rebellions, factions fighting for power, and some of those factions know your name." Her chest tightened. "My name?" "Yes. Some remember you as the noble who stood against corruption. They see you as a symbol. They want to use you." The woman lowered her gaze. Memories of her downfall pressed upon her. Her speeches in court, her calls for fairness, and the punishment she had suffered for daring to speak. Now, those same words were being remembered. She did not know if she felt pride or fear, and, "If they use me," she whispered, "what will happen to you?" The envoy looked at her steadily. "We will face it together." The outpost soon buzzed with news. Ships brought rumors of uprisings in the empire's inner worlds. Entire provinces refused the emperor's rule. Some declared themselves free. Others pledged loyalty to rival leaders. The once great empire was cracking like glass. The woman could not ignore it. She knew the patterns of power, the fragile threads that held courts together. At night, she sat with the envoy, mapping the movements of factions, predicting who would fall and who would rise. Her insight proved correct again and again. "You see things I cannot," the envoy told her. "That is why they fear you." But fear was dangerous. Soon, letters arrived not only from human commanders, but also from alien rebels. Some begged for her support. Some demanded it. Others threatened her if she refused. She read them all in silence. Her hands trembled as she set them aside. "No matter what I choose, they will hunt me," she said softly. The envoy reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers. "Then let them hunt us both." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but the steadiness in his voice gave her strength. For the first time, She did not feel entirely alone in the storm. Trouble soon followed. One night, alarms blared through the outpost. Ships approached, their insignia not of the Empire, but of a rebel faction. Soldiers scrambled, weapons ready. The envoy ordered the woman to stay inside, but she refused. "If they are here for me," she said firmly, "then hiding will not save us." Together, they stood at the gates as the rebel leader entered. He was tall, armored, his voice booming as he declared, "We have come for her. She is ours. She is the rightful voice of the people, and she will lead us." The envoy stepped forward. "She is free," he said. "She belongs to no one." The rebels bristled. Tension filled the air. Soldiers on both sides raised weapons. The woman's heart pounded. She had been powerless once, mocked and chained. She would not be powerless now. She lifted her chin and spoke clearly. "If you wish me to lead, then listen. I will not be your puppet. I will not be dragged by chains, not by the Empire, not by you. If you want my voice, it will speak truth, not your commands." The rebels fell into uneasy silence. Some looked angry, but others looked moved. After a long pause, their leader lowered his weapon. "Then speak truth," he said grudgingly. "We will listen, for now." They left as suddenly as they came, leaving behind unease, but also respect. The envoy turned to her, pride in his eyes. "You faced them without fear." She shook her head. "I was afraid, but I will not let fear silence me again." Days turned into weeks. The rebellion spread. The Empire sent spies and assassins, hoping to silence her before her name grew too powerful. The outpost became a fortress, guarded day and night. Yet within the walls, a strange calm grew between her and the envoy. They shared more of their lives. He taught her human games, and she laughed softly when she finally won a round. She told him stories of her ancestors, and he listened with genuine wonder. Their bond deepened, not through grand declarations but through small moments. Quiet, meals, shared glances, unspoken trust. But the storm outside only grew louder. One evening, a messenger ship arrived with grim news. The Emperor had fallen. The Empire was leaderless, and factions now fought openly for the crown. The woman stood in silence as she heard the words. She had once been mocked as a failure, cast out by that very empire. Now the same empire was collapsing, and her name was on the lips of rebels and courtiers alike. "What will you do?" the envoy asked gently. She looked at him, her eyes steady. "I will not run. If they seek me, I will face them, but I will not rise alone. If I stand with you." His answer was simple. "Then we stand together." Not long after, the palace gates of a distant city opened to her. The rebels had chosen her as their banner. Crowds filled the streets chanting her name. She walked through them, her heart pounding, her steps steady. She was no longer the woman in chains. She was the woman who had endured. The envoy walked at her side, his presence calm and strong. Whispers followed him too, some mocking, some admiring, but he ignored them. His eyes were only on her. In the great hall of the city, leaders of many factions gathered. Some doubted her, some despised her, but all listened as she spoke. "I was once given as a mockery," she said. "They thought I would break, but I did not. And if you think I will be your puppet, you are mistaken. I will lead only if I can lead with truth, with justice, and with peace. Otherwise I will walk away, and you may destroy yourselves without me." The hall fell into stunned silence. No one had expected her to speak with such fire. Slowly, one by one, the leaders bowed their heads. The envoy stood taller at her side, pride shining in his eyes. He knew then what she was becoming, not just a symbol, but a queen in her own right. That night, as they rested in quiet chambers, she whispered to him, "Do you see what they are asking of me?" "Yes," he said softly. "They are asking you to be more than you ever thought you could be. And do you see what they will do to you for standing with me?" He smiled faintly. "They can do what they like. I will not leave you." She closed her eyes, her heart heavy and full at once. For years, She had been mocked, beaten down, and cast aside. Now, she was being lifted higher than she had ever dreamed. But she knew she could not do it alone. She would not. In the rising storm of rebellion and broken empires, she had found her anchor, and together they would face whatever came next. The city was restless. Torches burned in the streets and banners of rival factions flapped in the wind. Soldiers patrolled every corner, their eyes sharp, their hands never far from their weapons. In the great halls of stone, leaders argued, voices clashing louder than swords. The empire was broken and everyone sought to seize the crown. The woman, once mocked and chained, now walked through those same halls with her head high. Her voice carried authority, her presence demanded respect. Yet in her heart she carried both pride and fear. Pride because she had risen higher than anyone expected. Fear because she knew the cost of standing at the center of such storms. The human envoy never left her side. To some, he was only her guard. To others, he was her shadow, the quiet strength behind her. But to her, he was more. He was the reason she could still stand, the hand that had pulled her up when the world had laughed. One evening, as the council argued again about who should claim the throne, the hall shook with the pounding of fists on the table. "She cannot lead," one lord cried. "She was cast out. She is a symbol of shame. And yet the people chant her name," another replied. "Without her you have no support." The room grew heated. Some demanded her obedience, others demanded her silence. Finally, she rose from her seat. The hall quieted, all eyes turning toward her. "I was once given away as a mockery," she said, her voice clear. "But I did not break. You call me shame? I say I am survival. You call me weakness? I say I am strength. If you want a puppet, look elsewhere. If you want a ruler who bows, look elsewhere. But if you want someone who will not sell you to the highest bidder, someone who will not abandon you when the empire burns, then you will follow me." The silence that followed was heavy. No one moved. Slowly, one by one, heads began to bow. Not all, not at once, but enough. The envoy stood behind her, his arms crossed, his eyes steady. He had seen battles fought with blades, but this was a battle fought with words, and she had won. That night in her private chamber, she sat by the window overlooking the torch-lit city. The envoy entered quietly, setting down a tray of food. She had not eaten all day. "You held them," he said softly. "Even those who hate you listened." She shook her head. "They will turn on me again. They only follow because they see no other choice." "Maybe," he replied, "but leadership is not about being loved. It is about being steady when others are not. Today, you were steady." She looked at him, her eyes tired but warm. "And if I fail?" He smiled faintly. "Then I will still be here." Her heart tightened. She said nothing, but his words gave her the strength to face another day. The weeks that followed were filled with trials. Rival lords tested her with schemes. Assassins tried to slip into her chambers at night. Rumors spread, painting her as a traitor, a foreigner's tool, even a danger to her own people. But each time, she faced them calmly. When a lord accused her of being too close to humans, she answered, "It was a human who gave me dignity when you gave me chains." When soldiers doubted her command, she walked among them, speaking not as a queen, but as one who had known pain. And they listened. When assassins came, it was the envoy who fought them off, his blade flashing in the torchlight. She stood beside him, not hiding, but facing danger with unflinching eyes. Together they endured, and with each trial, her power grew. Then came the day of battle. A rival faction, unwilling to accept her rise, marched on the city with thousands of soldiers. Their banners blackened the horizon. The council panicked, shouting orders, demanding plans. She stood before them and raised her voice. "You tremble, because you fear losing what little you hold. I do not tremble. I have already lost everything once. I will not lose again. If they want this city, they will have to walk through me first." The envoy stepped beside her, sword in hand, and, through me, the people rallied. Soldiers who once doubted her lifted their weapons. Civilians gathered supplies. For the first time, the city stood not for a lord or a title, but for her. The battle was long and fierce. Arrows darkened the sky. Walls shook under the weight of siege engines. The queen-to-be moved among her soldiers, her voice steady, her presence unyielding. The envoy fought at her side, his blade cutting down foes, his shield raised high. Together they became a symbol, not just of survival, but of defiance. At the height of the battle, the rival lord rode forward, his army behind. Him. He shouted across the field, "You are given as a joke. How dare you claim the crown?" She raised her voice in reply, her words carrying across the clash of steel. "I was given as a joke, but today I stand as truth, and truth does not bow to mockery." With a cry, her soldiers surged forward. The enemy wavered, then broke. The city held. When the smoke cleared, the people filled the streets with cheers. The once disgraced woman, now their savior, stood at the gates with the envoy. At her side, they placed a crown upon her head, not because of her birth, but because of her strength. She felt the weight of it heavy and real. She thought of the chains once locked on her wrists, and how those same hands now held power. She thought of the laughter that had once crushed her, and how those same voices now shouted her name in triumph. She turned to the envoy, her eyes full of gratitude. "They have crowned me queen, but without you I would still be nothing." He shook his head. "Without you there would be no crown to wear. I only walked with you. You chose to rise." Her heart swelled. She placed her hand over his. "Then, let us rise together." That night in the grand hall lit by torches and banners, the people sang songs of victory. Children ran through the aisles laughing. Soldiers drank and told tales of the battle. And at the center, the new queen stood with her human by her side. She was no longer a gift of mockery. She was no longer a broken noble. She was a queen chosen by her people, not given by her enemies. And deep within, she knew this was only the beginning. The crown was not the end of her story. It was the choice she had made, and the life they would build together. The palace was quiet at dawn. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm gold across the marble floors. Outside, the city was beginning to stir, vendors setting up their stalls, children running in the streets, soldiers preparing for patrols. But inside the throne hall, all was still. The queen sat upon the throne, her long robes flowing around her like rivers of light. She was not the same woman who had once been dragged in chains and mocked as a worthless gift. Now her crown rested upon her head with dignity, her eyes steady, her voice calm. Around her, alien lords and human envoys bowed in respect. Beside her stood the human, the man who had once accepted her not as an insult but as a person. He no longer looked like a simple envoy. His uniform bore new markings of honor, the signs of victories and peace he had helped create. Yet his gaze was unchanged, calm, steady, unwavering. He looked at her not as a queen, not as a symbol, but as the woman he had chosen to stand beside. Years had passed since the day of her mockery. The empire had been shaken by rebellion and war, but through courage and wisdom she had risen to claim the throne. What had begun as a cruel joke had become a story that echoed through both human and alien worlds, a story of strength, of loyalty, of love. And now, as she sat upon her throne, she did not sit alone. From behind the curtains, a child's laughter rang out. The queen's gaze softened as a small boy ran into the hall. His hair carried the dark strands of his human father, but his eyes shone with the bright colors of her people. He was living proof of two worlds united. The courtiers bowed lower as the child climbed the steps of the throne and sat beside his mother. She lifted him gently into her lap, her crown shining above his small head. The sight was powerful. Once she had been discarded, now she was mother to a child who would one day inherit not just a crown, but two legacies. But her rise had not erased all shadows. Enemies still whispered beyond the borders. Some lords still resented her for surviving what was meant to destroy her. Some humans still wondered if their envoy had given too much of himself to an alien queen. She knew the peace they had built was fragile, yet she also knew it was stronger than anyone had believed, because it was not built on fear or mockery, it was built on respect. One evening, she walked with her husband through the gardens of the palace. The night air was cool, the stars bright above. Their son chased fireflies near the fountains, laughing as he tried to catch the glowing insects. The queen paused beneath an old tree. Her voice was soft as she said, "Do you ever think about that day? The day they gave me to you?" The human looked at her carefully. "I think about it often. Not because of what they meant it to be, but because of what it became." She smiled, faintly. "They thought they were mocking you. They thought they were mocking me. Instead, they gave me the one person who saw me as more than a burden." He touched her hand gently. "And they gave me you. Without you, none of this would have been possible." She looked out at their son, who was still laughing as he played. Her heart swelled with a warmth she had never believed she would feel again. "I was once nothing. Now I am a queen, a wife, a mother. All because you refused to laugh at me." He shook his head. "No. All because you refused to let them define you. I only gave you my hand. You chose to rise." Her eyes shone as she held his gaze. In his words, she found truth. He had given her dignity, but she had chosen to walk the long, hard path toward power and peace. Together, they had built something no one thought possible. The boy ran back to them, holding a jar filled with fireflies. "Look, mother. Look, father. They shine like stars." The queen knelt to meet her son's eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "They shine because they are free. Never forget that, my son. Freedom is what makes the smallest light brighter than any crown." The boy nodded, though he did not yet fully understand. But she knew one day he would. News spread across the empire of the queen's strength, of her human husband's loyalty, and of their child. Traders carried the story across the stars. Soldiers told it in their camps, and children whispered it as they played. To some, it was a tale of defiance. To others, it was a tale of hope. But to all, it was a reminder that mockery can turn into destiny, that weakness can rise to power, and that kindness can outlast cruelty. One day, as the queen addressed her court, she spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "I was once given away as a joke," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I am not a joke, I am not a shadow. I am proof that no one has the right to decide another's worth. I am proof that dignity cannot be taken. It can only be hidden, waiting for the moment it is restored." The hall erupted in applause. Even those who had once doubted her could not deny the truth of her words. That night, after the court had ended and the palace had grown quiet, the queen stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Lights glowed across the streets, not with the cold cruelty she had once known, but with warmth. She could hear music drifting upward, the songs of people celebrating their queen. The human stepped beside her, placing a cloak over her shoulders against the cool breeze. "They love you," he said quietly. She leaned against him, her eyes on the horizon. "They do not love me because I am queen. They love me because I endured, because I rose when they thought I would fall, and because I did not rise alone." He smiled faintly. No one truly rises alone. Their son, already drifting to sleep in the chamber behind them, stirred and murmured in his dreams. The queen turned to look at him, her heart soft. "He will grow in a world where he does not have to fight for dignity. That is all I want." "And he will," her husband said firmly. As the stars filled the night sky, the queen felt peace settle in her heart. She remembered the chains, the laughter, the cruel words that once defined her. She remembered the hall where she had been given away like a broken trinket. And she remembered the moment when everything had changed. Not because the world had grown kinder, but because one man had chosen to see her differently. Now she was queen. She was mother. She was loved. And above all, she was free. Her story, once meant to be an insult, had become a legend, and as she watched the stars, holding her husband's hand, she knew that no empire, no enemy, no whisper of cruelty could ever take that away.